So thanks so much, everyone. Welcome to Co-ops and the Future of Technology. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So today you can look forward to an inspiring and forward-looking conversation with two groundbreaking Canadian technology cooperatives that are redefining how tech can serve communities. So this webinar will feature Andi Argast and Dante Sanchez from Hypha Worker Co-operative, along with Dana Ayotte, Colin Clark, and Michelle D'Souza from Lichen Community Systems Co-operative, all brilliant and creative people at the forefront of building inclusive, collaborative, and values-driven digital solutions. Discover how these co-ops are using inclusive design, collaborative practices, and the cooperative model to create technology that reflects community needs and drives meaningful social change. So whether you're in tech, community development, or the cooperative sector, this session will offer fresh perspectives on how innovation and equity can go hand in hand. The Ontario Cooperative Association is honored to present today's webinar to you. This webinar is part of our year-long series celebrating 2025 as the International Year of the Cooperatives, as designated by the UN. The Ontario Cooperative Association is a nonprofit cooperative. We are owned and governed by our member co-ops and credit unions from around Ontario. And our mission is to educate, advocate, and create opportunities for collaboration as we help build a stronger and more sustainable cooperative economy in Ontario. I invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on the land that you are joining us from today. While we are gathered virtually from many places across Canada, we recognize that each of these places has a deep history and ongoing presence of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Please join me in recognizing that the land where I live and work is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and is covered by the Williams and Upper Canada treaties. Let us honor the enduring relationship Indigenous peoples have with this land and reaffirm our collective responsibility to pursue reconciliation and justice through our efforts in care and community building. So our agenda today will consist of this short welcome, followed by a presentation from Andi and Dante from Hypha Worker Co-operative, and then we'll introduce Dana, Colin, and Michelle from Lichen Community Systems Co-operative. We'll provide a few minutes for audience questions after each presenter portion, and then we'll have a final few minutes before the end of the session for any additional questions. Couple housekeeping notes. Please mute your mic during the speaker portion. This session will be recorded and shared, and a link to the recording as well as the transcript and slide deck will be provided to all registrants. To help keep things flowing smoothly, we ask that you hold your questions until each of our guests has finished their respective presentation. However, if at any point you encounter technical terms or concepts that are unclear and are preventing you from following along, please feel free to use the raise hand feature or type your question in the chat, and we'll do our best to pause and clarify. I'll do my best to monitor the chat throughout, and you can enter questions in the chat throughout the session as well, and we'll make sure they get addressed at the end. But we do want to make sure everyone can stay engaged and understand what's being shared. So if you have those tech questions, please let us know. So we'd like to welcome, I'm so excited to have these wonderful guests today. So I'll tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll let them tell you a little bit more once they present their portion. So we'd like to welcome Andi Argast and Dante Sanchez from Hypha Worker Co-operative. So Andi's experiences span the nonprofit, library sciences, government, and education sectors. An expert in raising digital literacy and building usable tech through human-centered design. Andi believes the key to doing good is understanding the tool set, something she helps her clients and team do every day as co-creation lab practice lead. Dante Sanchez is an engineer with a background in mechanical and software development. He's currently focused on planning and building tooling for peer-to-peer networks. Dante has experience in research, development, and production for geophysics, ultrasound, and mass spectrometry instrumentation. He's interested in building community-owned infrastructure and spreading technical literacy. And from Lichen Community Systems, we have Dana Ayotte. She's an artist and designer who has been working in the field of inclusive design for over 10 years. With a background in mechanical engineering, Dana brings a multifaceted approach to accessible and inclusive technology design. Colin Clark is an artist, researcher, and developer of community-led technologies. Since the 1990s, he's contributed to the growth of inclusive design practices in Canada and internationally. Colin has designed, built, and consulted on many large-scale accessible software systems and standards. With Lichen, he designs creative technologies that provide access to live performance for audiences and artists. And Michelle D'Souza has been working in the digital accessibility and inclusive design field for over 20 years in many roles, including software development and product, and team management, with a focus on collaboration, communication, and team cohesion. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen, and I would ask you to join me in welcoming Andi and Dante from Hypha Worker Co-operative to start off today's webinar.
Thanks, Michelle. Just let me get the presentation queued up, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Dante, who will take us through the first part of the presentation, and then I will be back with you.
I can see it.
Everybody can see it. Okay, fantastic. Dante?
Thanks, Andi. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Michelle. Thanks, everyone, for showing up today. So yeah, let's get going with, can you go to the next slide, please, Andi? Today we are here to talk about how we can build a future of tech with co-ops. Through our work at Hypha, we are proposing a vision of the future that is different from the one being offered by big tech, both in terms of what work means to us and what values end up being baked into the technologies that we make for one another. We are exploring ways of engaging in meaningful work and building tech that better reflects our values. In many cases, values that may not align with, let's say, interests in tech giants in Silicon Valley. We'll begin by talking about how Hypha came to be, how we work together, and then we will highlight several projects that we have been involved in that reflect our values and perspectives on new technologies. Next slide, please, Andi. First up, who makes up Hypha? Back in 2019, 7 people started a co-op as an experiment to do work in a different way from what they were used to. They incorporated Hypha as a non-share worker cooperative under the Ontario Cooperative Corporations Act. Hypha is also a non-profit organization. This means that it does not operate with the primary purpose of generating profit, but rather to provide work for its members. As the slide mentions, another point that we made sure became part of our culture at the very beginning, we are committed to working openly. So this is most clearly reflected in our handbook, and we'll come back to that shortly. Hypha was founded by people with a diverse mix of backgrounds and skill sets, and it remains so today. We count among ourselves engineers, technologists, designers, artists, and organizers. Today, 4 of the original 7 founders are still around, but now we have a total of 10 members in the co-op. Andi and I joined 3 years ago now. All members play a part in setting the direction of the co-op, and joining Hypha as a member requires being employed for 1 year before a person is invited to apply for membership. In order to be accepted, all applications must be approved unanimously by current members. We are a remote-first company with most of our members based in the Greater Toronto area. We have a monthly all-hands virtual meeting where we keep each other updated, and it's also a forum for us to share achievements and announcements. In some cases, also engage in some discussion. Some folks meet regularly at a co-working space in the west end of Toronto, and we have yearly retreats to do some retrospection and planning work for the year ahead. Next, please. Speaking of retreats, yeah, that one. In the 2021 retreat, several members aligned on this set of values. As a point of reference, a consultant that we recently started working with to review our internal processes and policies, they organized individual interviews with all the members of the co-op to collect, among other things, the response to the question, how would you describe Hypha in one word? And shortly after this exercise, they produced a report that included a word cloud with the responses to this question, and it was quite satisfying to see that this list of values, they still resonate one way or another with all of us. This is 4 years on. So it's good to have that present in the handbook. It's good to have that on the website, but it's one thing to have that published somewhere. It's something else to make sure that we live up to these values. It does take some dedication to build a culture that puts values first. And I'll use self-agency from this list as an example. We don't have this articulated either on the slide or in the handbook, but we do try to work as a flat organization. And one thing we noticed in the last couple of years was that we needed help to get some alignment around our decision-making processes. We engaged a team based in Quebec, Percolab, to organize an in-person workshop for us so we could all get some practice with consensus-based decision-making, and also to learn about how other flat orgs manage to navigate group decisions. And yeah, afterwards, within a couple of weeks, we were trying different approaches to make our decision-making easier to manage and also easier to participate in. The point here is that yeah, if you want to grow a strong and cohesive internal culture, you need to be prepared to put in plenty of time and effort. Why do we see this strong culture as something that we should strive for? I think many of us think it's a critical piece of building a desirable, sustainable, and efficient work environment. All of us, we want to work at Hypha because we believe in the values of the projects we take on, and also because there's a sense of shared perspectives among our peers, as opposed to seeing it as just another job. I'm not sure how much of this is a culture that comes from us being a co-op, or just because of the group of people that we're working with, but it does free us up to focus on our work, for the most part, in a very positive manner. So, like, speaking of work, next, please, Andi. What do we do at Hypha? We operate as a service consultancy that works on engineering and software projects, and yeah, we have a number of the terms here that I'll be the first to acknowledge that the areas that we work on, for many people, I mean, even when I first started working on Hypha, they kind of seemed quite esoteric to me. So I'll try to translate each of these terms one by one, just so that people get an idea of like what it is that we do. First off is cryptography. Cryptography it deals with verifying and protecting all sorts of data, such as images, text, or even your own ID. Decentralized governance deals with how to make decisions within large groups of people who typically don't know each other, in many cases don't even communicate with one another, in the absence of a central organizing authority. Another item here we have is web protocols. A protocol is a language or a standard for transmitting and sharing data. Just as an example, email is one protocol. And the last one here that we have as an area of expertise is distributed ledger technologies. This term is just another way of saying blockchain, which its core is a set of records that are shared and updated by many computers in a network. The mix of clients that we work with today is in part a result of certain requirements for what kind of organizations we want to collaborate with. And this means that we just don't stop at, will this project pay our bills, but also asking, are are their values aligned with ours? Whenever we find ourselves facing new opportunities, we discuss these opportunities in open channels within our chat systems, so that we can gauge interest, we can check on value alignment, and we can check up on skills matching. And yeah, how do we deliver this project? Let's go to the next slide, please, Andi. We have 3 practice areas that focus on different combinations of our areas of expertise, and their sets of clients are as diverse as our member skill sets. So we have Co-Creation Lab, which works with arts, culture, and activist organizations that are looking for support in tech-centric endeavors. Data Provenance focuses on data integrity and verification, not just for archival purposes, but for applications such as data pipelines for AI. In this day and age where we have a sitting president trying to convince a journalist that a poorly photoshopped image is real, the notion of how do you certify that this image or video is real is getting a lot of attention. And lastly, the interchain operations practice area supports the testing and deployment of software across decentralized networks. We've had members spend time in more than one practice area, but for the most part, most of us have been within a single practice area for as long as we've been with Hypha. Next, please, Andi. So that covers project work and how we kind of like split our areas of expertise or our resources among different clients, different practice areas. But also, aside from our project work, all members contribute to internal work to keep the co-op running. Not sure, Andi, you can probably correct me if I missed any of them, but have 6 working groups listed here. So operations, they are the equivalent of our internal HR department. They handle contracts, company policies. They manage our salary review processes, which is this salary review process. I think it's a pretty interesting way we do things because we're co-op, we're a flat organization. You can read about it in our handbook. We can maybe talk about it during Q&A because I think the way we do it is pretty interesting, how we manage to engage with our peers in order to arrive at a new salary level. Also, we also have the finance working group that handles payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable. They prepare the financial statements for fiscal year end with the accountant. Our communications working group, they are in charge of producing newsletters, blog posts, and also managing all the social media accounts. Infrastructure, because we are a tech worker co-op, we do manage our infrastructure for many operations as well as for project work. For instance, we host our website, we host our chat servers in machines that we own and operate. Other things that the infrastructure working group is responsible for is things like account management with Google and any services that may require the equivalent of an IT department. Our strategy working group, they handle all the high level and long-term planning around our projects. And the governance working group, they manage all the updates to our bylaws. They're responsible for making any adjustments, if any are required, to our bylaws, and engaging with membership so that everyone is informed in case any new decisions need to be made. That basically covers how we work within Hypha. I touched on a lot of points here. Maybe we can start collecting like a list of items to discuss during Q&A. But for now, if we're okay, I can pass it to Andi to talk about some of our projects.
Sure. I haven't been monitoring the chat. Michelle, are there any questions that you feel we should address now, or should I just continue?
No, it looks like we're okay, Andi. Yeah, you can keep going.
Okay.
And if anyone
Great.
has questions, yeah, just pop them in and then we'll address them once Andi's done.
Okay, so Dante took you through what our internal operations and project work looks like, and now I'm going to talk about some of the projects we've worked on in more detail, and I think hopefully this will help sort of explain if you're still wondering what exactly it is that we do at Hypha. All right, so as mentioned, Hypha is a technical consultancy, so this means we provide engineering and software development services to a variety of clients and projects. One of the longest running projects we've worked on is Starling Lab. This is a partnership between the USC Shoah Foundation, which is a US nonprofit organization, dedicated to making audio-visual interviews with survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust, and Stanford University in California. Starling Lab is focused on developing solutions to mis- and disinformation by building novel technical processes to tag media and data with cryptographic hashes. This creates a verification stamp so that people can look at the metadata and tell that it has not been altered or tampered with. And Hypha's role in this is to provide the technical expertise for this project. One of the biggest successes of this project came a couple of years ago in 2022 with the publication of a feature article in Rolling Stone. This project was actually also nominated for an Emmy, which is pretty cool. So the Rolling Stone article was explored a Bosnian war crimes investigation from the war there in the early 1990s. And Hypha's role was to create an immutable, which means a permanent archive of the American photographer Ron Haviv's original photos that were taken during the war, and the digital assets used in the online version of the article. And when I'm finished talking, I can drop a link in if you're curious about learning more, and we'll also share the slide deck.
Are you waiting for a bus?
After.
There's no
Sorry?
service at the stop anymore. It's
Oh.
been this one and that.
Sorry, somebody's
taken it.
We'll share the slide deck after the presentation, so you can actually click on all the links that we are sharing here. Okay, so as I said, Hypha provides services, but we've actually also developed one product, which is called Distributed Press. So Distributed Press is a tool that lets content creators, that could be journalists, bloggers, anybody that has digital content that they want to share, lets these creators publish to peer-to-peer networks. So in other words, networks that are not centralized the same way that like AWS, like an Amazon web server, or any big hosting company is. This form of networking increases the resilience of the data because it's harder to take down or censor. A product like Distributed Press has become even more important since the US election, where the federal government there is quite hostile to many activists and nonprofit groups, and information is disappearing from government websites at an impressive rate. And we've actually noticed an uptick in activist organizations reaching out to us to find out more about Distributed Press since last fall. So for these small activist organizations, Distributed Press adds an important tool in their digital toolkit to share their website so that their website and other resources can stay online. And there are currently about 100 websites using the Distributed Press tech stack. Distributed Press also has a feature called the social inbox that pulls comments from the Fediverse. Some of you might be familiar with Mastodon. Right into your blog or website, creating a community and interactivity on your website without having to use platforms like X or Facebook. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with like the sort of the Twitter widget in the corner of the website that shows like conversation and tweets about something in particular. Well, this does it for Mastodon, which is a social media platform that does not use an algorithm. To showcase Distributed Press as a tool, we've also created an online magazine called Compost. Compost is run by a self-governing editorial collective, and they've published 3 issues so far, each one paying the writers that contributed their work. So some of you might have heard of the term DAO, as in D-A-O, not to be confused with the Chinese philosophy as Taoism. This acronym stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and it is a newer type of organization or collective that's often used to build open source software projects, especially those that use or are related to blockchain. These organizations are an example, as Dante mentioned earlier. One of our expertise is in decentralized governance. So that's coordinating large groups of people without a central authority. For this particular project, which is called Friends of Heck, we worked with a Swiss digital arts museum called Heck, or the Haus der Elektronik Kunst, which is they've focused especially on digital and multimedia arts. And so with this organization, we created a digital space, in this case, a Discord-based community where their members could gather to discuss art, plan exhibitions, and the like. So to access the digital space that was built, members had to buy an online token, but HEC really wanted to make this as accessible to people with all levels of technical literacy as possible. So you could buy a token with a Web3 wallet, like MetaMask, or you could just pay using your credit card. And Hypha developed automated systems whereby no matter how you paid, you ended up in the same place. So it was a level or an equal user experience, regardless of how comfortable you were with using some of these newer tools. Okay, let's take a look at a very different type of project. So in and about 2021-ish, Hypha joined an international collective of cooperators and developers who wanted to create an alternative to Zoom, which, as many of you probably recall, was suddenly everywhere all the time in those earlier days of the pandemic. And Zoom had and still does some kind of suspect data and privacy policies. And this group came together to try and develop an alternative to that. The platform is called Meet.coop, and it uses an open source video conferencing software called Big Blue Button that was developed at Carleton University in Ottawa. And Meet.coop was an interesting project to work on because it did, one, enjoy a short-lived success with several hundred users, and it is still going. However, having worked on the project, I found that it suffered from tensions between ideology around how to operate the collective, which was actually never formally incorporated into a cooperative, and the requirements of providing a software product that works when and how people want to use it. When you're going up against an incumbent like Zoom, which is a very seamless experience, users want a similar level of experience. And so Meet.coop was interesting in sort of checking that assumptions around like what people really cared about. In this case, they wanted, software that worked. The project is still ongoing. So if you're looking for a Zoom alternative, you can check it out. You can pay for it via Open Collective, which is a fiscal hosting. And although Hypha is no longer involved, the Canadian server is hosted by WebTV, a Montreal-based co-op. And finally, there is one other cooperative sector focused project I want to talk about. So I would say that, and Dante talked a little bit about our values. And although it's not, and I would say that, one of these values is curiosity, and it's also one of the defining characteristics of the workers at Hypha. So we're often experimenting with how we can improve our government and our decision-making process. You talked a little bit about our work with Percolab. And this project, which we call the governance experiment, is a multi-year exploration of how digital tools are used in cooperative governance and decision-making. My colleague Vincent and I participated in a recent cohort of an organization called MetaGov, which is not related to Meta, like Facebook Meta, that looks at questions of democratic and deliberative governance in a variety of contexts. I highly recommend you check out MetaGov if you're not familiar with them already. They do some very interesting work. And as part of our work with this cohort, we built a governance dashboard. You can see a screen cap of it here. I appreciate that it's quite small, but we'll share some links afterwards. And this governance dashboard pulls in data from GitHub and Google Sheets, which is actually what Hypha uses to hold many of our governance-related discussions and conversations. So although in the early days we used software like Lumio, which some of you might be familiar with, it's more of a traditional decision-making or governance piece of software. We actually take more of a bricolage approach, stitching together a variety of tools. And then our governance dashboard displays the most pertinent information there. We also built an anonymous voting tool that we use, and both the dashboard and the voting tool are available as open source projects. They can be used or remixed by any organization that's interested. As well, we wrote a case study on the work if you are curious about it, which was part of Lichen's Community for Inclusion, Data Communities for Inclusions project. So you can check that out there. And Vincent will be presenting this work at the ICA CCRA Global Research Conference in Montreal, which is the International Cooperative Alliances Committee on Cooperative Research Conference. And that is everything for us. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you all for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Andi and Dante. It's just so interesting. Does anyone have any questions? So Eileen, is there a link for the open source anonymous voting tool?
Yep. I'll actually drop a link to the case study in the chat. And that's got all of the links to the dashboard and a bunch of other pieces in there so that you can see it. There you go. And as I believe Michelle is going to send out the presentation afterwards, so you'll get all of the many, many links that are in the slide deck.
Can I ask just from a oh, sorry, Bharat, you have a question?
Hi, Michelle. No, please go ahead. I mean, I'll ask later. No hurry.
No, you go ahead, please.
Thanks, Michelle. No, great presentation, Dante and Andy. Really, I mean, as Michelle mentioned, I mean, a lot of very interesting tech work in the corporate spirit that you're doing. And when you mind, is that, say, down the road, maybe say a few years down the road, say if you're thinking of scaling up, more people join your co-op. At that point in time, so how do you have any thoughts about how you will approach decision making at that point in time? Just curious to know about that, Andy, Dante.
Sure. Just to recap, the question was how our decision-making processes might change as Hypha gets bigger?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Dante, do you want me to take a crack at this and then you can add your 2 cents? Okay.
Sounds good.
So that's an interesting question. We discussed this, like the size of Hypha, quite a bit at our last retreat. And I mean, I think the short answer is that we're not actually planning to get that much bigger. Like the goal for our organization is not to just become this huge monolith. We're not going to be the next Mondragon. I think the members felt that like 15 was sort of like our sweet spot. And so I don't think with like that marginal increase, we would change our decision-making processes. Like that being said, I think we continually refine them. Like we try new tools out. I think that it's constantly evolving, but sort of the core pieces in which like there's like a consent-based culture. We have like fairly like in-depth and detailed discussions about the things that we do. All of those core elements would remain the same because they allow us to sort of walk that fine line between having the discussions that need to be had while also coming to a resolution and decision fairly quickly because we work in the tech space and need to like move on things. Like we can't spend 3 months deciding whether or not we want to do something. And so we sort of have to straddle those two competing, the thoughtfulness and also the urgency. Dante, if you had anything to add?
No, that about covers it. Yeah, the whole 15-ish point of threshold for members. That's pretty much where we arrived. I think there was like a very like clear picture that like if we said how about 20 people, everyone said that's way too much. So I think especially if we think about like how much it costs to keep this number of people like employed and paid, it would be a really good problem to have. Like, how do we bring more people, assuming we have enough money for everyone? But the main thing was that it becomes untenable when it comes to the decision making, and everyone's gut instinct was that we would have to introduce some sort of like middle management in the mix to keep things running.
That's great. Any other questions? Drew?
You hinted at the salary, like how you came to salary levels and how you had that discussion. Did you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I'll bring up the link in our handbook to the employee salary guide, because we do have an open salary guide that's based on 3 criteria: or your level, your responsibility, and your seniority. Level is, yeah, as you upscale over time and you start becoming more delivering more items of value to our clients, you can argue that your L should go up. And as you start to contribute more to the organization, both from an internal side as well as from an external, whether it's bringing more clients in or managing relationships between the co-op and external facing parties, that's your R level, sort of. So yeah, this kind of like numbers inform where you're going to end up in the salary grid, but the way you reach your spot in the grid is through a yearly process. In some cases, if you want to have a repeat of the process in between year-long periods, you can have one 6 months after the last one. But it's basically 3 steps where you first produce a self-assessment of where you are today compared to your last review. Then you have a peer assessment where you get together with 2 of your peers. You reach a consensus in terms of where, as a group, where everyone thinks you should be. And the last step is once everyone has gone through this process in the co-op during this like time period where we do our yearly reviews, the operations working group and the finance working group, they go through the numbers and they say, yes, let's go ahead with all the adjustments that have been proposed. So that's sort of how we do things. So it's one thing. And I should mention one more thing on top of this yearly review that takes place at the beginning, sometime in January, February, at the end of the fiscal year when we do our annual general meeting. We've gotten into the habit of proposing cost of living increases across the board. So that's like our 2 levers we have to handle salary adjustments. Andi, anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think like Dante did a good job of spelling it out. I would say maybe I think that different cooperatives handle salaries in very different ways. I know a lot of them pool all of the work that they or all the revenue from projects, then divide it up based on who works on which project, and the structure we have that wouldn't be equitable. So I would say that like many of the other pieces of Hypha, like our solution works for now, and we'll probably continue to fine tune it as it goes. And people sort of, have suggestions for improvements, and we're always open to that as it goes on.
Thank you.
Drew J., you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm just got called on as a noisy truck was going by, but I think it's okay now. Yeah, just I guess thank you so much for your presentation. Super interesting to hear about Hypha. I've obviously followed your work over the years. I'm super curious, I guess, in a nod to the sort of title of this event. I guess where you see things going if Hypha is gonna sort of reach a sweet spot in terms of its number of employees. Do you have a vision of how tech co-ops can grow laterally? Do you have thoughts about federating technology co-ops? Do you have thoughts about I guess policies that could, in the context of Canada, we're obviously in a very there's a lot of incentives for the tech sector, but I'm assuming not a lot for co-ops. So I'd love to hear a few reflections about, I guess, what policies could be put in place that could encourage more tech co-ops. So yeah, that's 3 questions. That's probably enough. Thanks so much for your presentation.
Yeah, there's a lot packed in there. Around sort of like the vision for growing laterally, I would say that absolutely, I think the end goal, that's not quite the right word, but the ideal would be to have more of like a collective or coalition building component of tech cooperatives in Canada. We can see this in some other areas. I mean, in Quebec, as an example, mostly French speaking cooperatives, they tend to have organizations that are more tech cooperative focused. In the UK as well, there's tech cooperative like specific umbrella organizations. And I'd love to see something like that for the rest of Canada, for English speaking Canada, for Canada generally. I think that we, like, as individual cooperatives, like, yes, like we can go out and talk to people about, how great it and interesting it is to be, and what this like different perspective on like breeding different types of technological futures. But I think without some sort of like movement building, that will just always sort of be chipping away at like sort of a very lower level. I would, in terms of the policies, I'm sure maybe Drew, you've taken a look at it, but there's a really interesting article that was written a couple of years ago by Jason Spicer and Michelle Zong that compared the entrepreneurial ecosystems of Montreal and Toronto, and looked at tech cooperatives specifically and what those enablers were in place in those two geographic areas to, in the case of Montreal, have a robust tech cooperative ecosystem, and in the case of Toronto, not so much. And it really was interventions at all levels of government. So municipal, provincial, and federal governments working together to provide financial and policy incentives that supported these cooperatives. It was things as basic as ensuring that cooperatives were mentioned in business schools when people were coming out. It was ensuring that co-ops don't fall in sort of like this gray area between nonprofits and for-profit organizations where, as we know, we found out when we look for grants or federal funding or other types of funding, we just don't qualify because we don't fit into like the mold that they're looking for. And so it really is like a very nuanced approach, and it really does need to be an ecosystem-based approach in order to build an ecosystem, like unsurprisingly. It's not just one level of government or one particular organization that's going to pull a lever and make the magic happen. It really does need to be a concerted effort. Dante, do you have any other? Yeah, I'll find the article and share it in the chat. I can see there's a question about it. Dante, did you have anything else to add on that?
No, just echoing the vision for a coalition of many co-ops that support one another. That'll be my vision.
Well, that's great. And thanks for that. Like, that's a whole big discussion too, because I think that's the importance of doing, things like this, and the importance of understanding the cooperative model and how to talk to people and joining, supporting other organizations so we can advocate for you. And I think just the more people know about cooperatives, the more likely it is that people are going to start one. And that's like, we're kind of at ground zero in a way where people just don't even know they're out there as an option. So the more we can work together, with everyone in the sector and champions outside the sector, and share information, I think the better it is to build that cooperative ecosystem. So thanks so much for your question, Drew J, and for Andi and Dante for answering it so succinctly. Thank you. Okay, so I think we'll move on now. And thank you so much, Andi and Dante. That was so fantastic, so interesting. And then we'll touch back at the end if anyone else has questions for you as well. So with that, let's introduce Michelle, Dana, and Colin from Lichen Community Systems, and I'll invite you to share your screen.
Are my slides up?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Michelle, for inviting us to do this webinar, and hi to everyone. Thank you for attending. I'll kick us off with an overview of Lichen Community Systems. We're a brand new worker cooperative founded last July. As we give this presentation, we're going to stop to take time to describe the images that are on our slides to support people with visual impairments, as well as those who might be on a walk or on their phone or driving or any number of other things they may do. So the first slide has the Lichen Community Systems logo with the name in large print, and the dot over the I is a kind of abstracted image of a lichen. Lichen Community Systems is a nonprofit studio that's dedicated to growing the practice of community-led design. Community-led design, well, what is that? It really builds on the principle from the disability advocacy movement of nothing about us without us. The idea that design should happen with those for whom the design most impacts. Community-led design really aims to go beyond consultation or co-creation, but rather to support the creation of technologies and systems that are designed by, are accessible to, and are ownable by communities. So a shift in our design practice over the last decade or so has really been this kind of traditional design approach of designing for a particular community and then moving to the co-design model, which is a design with. And community-led design is very much rooted in the cooperative principles and is aiming for design by communities. So Lichen is focused on doing research on designing and sharing transformative technologies and accessible practices. We make things and we think about how to push the practice of making things within community. We provide training, consultation, and mentorship for accessible design, for software development, and inclusive culture change. And we design creative technologies for the arts, nonprofit, and social sectors. Since we're a new cooperative, we've been doing a lot of kind of mission and vision work over the last few months. And so thought it would be good to share the vision that we have for the cooperative. We imagine that through Lichen's efforts, communities will have greater access to the tools, the human capacity, and the education that they need to design, build, and sustain their own social and technical systems. There are 4 co-founders of Lichen. 3 of us are here today, I believe. And since there's images here, maybe we'll each describe our images. Dana, do you want to go first?
Start. Yeah, thanks, Colin. I'm Dana Ayotte. So in this image, I'm a white woman with short brown hair, wearing yellow glasses and a blue sweater. And I'll also describe Avatar Gill. He's not here right now. He's a brown man with glasses holding a black and white cat.
I'm Michelle D'Souza, and I am a brown woman wearing purple glasses standing beside a snow person in the picture. There's no snow here today.
Thank goodness. And I'm Colin Clark in the photo here. I'm a white man with brown, increasingly graying hair, highlighter yellow glasses, and a blue checked shirt. Behind me is a multicolored metallic sculpture. So, Michelle, would you like to talk about why Lichen became a cooperative?
I would love to. So at Lichen, we have a long background of working in academic and nonprofit environments. And there were lots of things about those environments that actually suited us really well. So we want to be able to focus our work on systemic change. And that's something that's really hard to fund in a for-profit environment. So one of the things we considered was going the nonprofit route. But in traditional nonprofits, there's often a gap between who's in charge and makes decisions and who does the work. And had we incorporated as a nonprofit, we could have created operating procedures that enabled a different structure, but it felt to us like the co-op model naturally put our values into action. Those doing the work are making the decisions. And it helps us to resist the cultural and legal pressures towards hierarchy and dominant culture decision making. Much of our past work has centered around disability and inclusion, and it's really important to us to build an organization that supports and empowers workers with disabilities. And that requires a highly flexible and adaptable environment, which we felt that a co-op model and its focus on consensus building could provide. As Colin mentioned, much of our work incorporates community-led design, and the co-op structure reflects those same values in the work environment with consensus building, direct decision-making, and worker empowerment. Our first large project in the co-op sector involved a trip to India, where we spent time with women from the Seva Cooperative Federation. And this is a group of over 100 grassroots cooperatives, and it was a really incredible experience to meet them. And one of the women that I got to meet was in her 80s, and she had founded a milk co-op in her village to empower the women who were already doing that work. So their co-op changed the lives of those women and their families. And she was really inspiring, and it was so hopeful. So since being involved in that project 7 years ago, we kept coming back to the idea of having our work environments reflect the values that we hold. And so last July, when we were incorporating Lichen, it seemed like the best fit for us to go as to incorporate as a co-op. And so far it's been great. If you want to go to the next slide, Colin, I want to talk a little about accessibility and innovation. There are some new obligations and requirements around accessibility now because of the Accessible Canada Act. There's also an expectation that private sector services are accessible to disabled people. So there's this legal responsibility, but the way we see accessible design is as a source for innovation. People with disabilities and other equity denied communities are innovators. They have no choice, they have to be. They hold the knowledge and expertise needed to design better technologies. Accessible design is a catalyst of better products and services, especially when it truly engages with community. And maybe Dana wants to talk a bit more about that.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so we'd mentioned what is community-led design off the top, and Colin talked about it. I wanted to just say a little bit more about it here. First, I'll just describe the image on this slide. It's an image of a woman standing in front of large papers on the wall filled with writing, gesturing, and speaking while others in the room look on. So here, wanted to just touch again on this move from co-design to community-led design, as Colin mentioned, going kind of beyond co-creation and designing with towards a community-led process, which is more the design by. So working, having community leaders actually take on the planning of the process, the facilitating of the process, and really owning that process themselves. And this really provides a more sustainable design process, and it gives community members obviously much more agency in the full process and therefore on the outcomes of that process. So it really, the entire, as I mentioned, the entire design process is developed with and by community members. And this requires identifying and collaborating with members who will be most impacted by the outcomes. And engaging that existing leadership within the community, as I mentioned, where they will take on the planning and leading the sessions, the co-design sessions themselves. Next slide. And then we wanted to just put community-led co-design in the context of co-ops. And we really feel that community-led design is inspired and informed by cooperative governance practices and the cooperative principles. So for example, democratic member control, cooperation among cooperatives, concern for community, and many others, probably all of them really. And community-led design can support the direct engagement of co-op member workers in important decision-making processes that impact the design of new technologies. So it's really important to work with those whose needs are least served by the existing designs and or those who have experienced historical exclusions and inequities. And that equitable cooperative governance means that participants have autonomy over that whole process. And in this way, community-led design allows for kind of design by governance and as well as governance by design. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to move into describing some of our projects that we've done. And this first project is called Data Communities for Inclusion. And I'll just, again, describe the image on the slide here as a screenshot of the landing page for the Data Communities for Inclusion project, which contains a vibrant photo of Indian women agricultural workers. And this site can be found at datacommunities.ca. And so in this project, Michelle actually mentioned SEVA already. We worked again with SEVA Federation of Co-ops in India, which is the Self-Employed Women's Association. And in this project, we were advocating for worker ownership of data and AI systems and how these can be more justly governed when the platform's tools and practices are designed, sustained, and owned by those most impacted by how data is collected and used. So we were really looking at data governance issues from the perspective of women's agricultural co-ops and how women are currently gathering and sharing data related to their farming practices, looking at, for example, how farmer facilitation centers, which are a physical space where women gather to buy seeds and other things, how that physical gathering place can also be a digital touch point and support how that can support data governance in that way. And the next slide, continuing the same project, so data communities for inclusion. So we also created a toolkit for this project that you can find on the website. And it's a toolkit of resources, including articles, guides, and case studies that are rooted in Seva's work and adaptable to other contexts. And Andi mentioned the Hypha case study, which is a really amazing case study in the toolkit. I highly recommend it. And then I'll just describe the image here too, the screenshot of the toolkit on the landing page, showing various toolkit entries. And I also wanted to highlight another case study there. There are a number of them, but we also worked with Equal Care Co-op in the UK that some of you might be familiar with. They're a co-op of care receivers and caregivers, and they have created a kind of a matching platform, but it's so much more than that. And they have a really interesting structure, part of which they call stacking the hats, and they have circles of care, and it really supports the agency of the person receiving care. And they've also done an amazing job of documenting all their processes, their governance processes. So take a look at their case study as well. And then part of this project, we also developed an app called the Samart app, which is a custom, or developed an affordable and accessible custom mobile app for farm-to-table sales to track stock prices, availability, not stock prices, but stock and prices, availability, users, and ordering. And this is a custom mobile app based on Google Sheets as a backend, because that was something that Seva Federation staff were already using and familiar with and comfortable with. And in here, there's a screenshot of that Google Sheet showing images of produce and their related data. And one other thing we did on this project was we led a sort of how to do co-design, a community-led design workshop with the Federation members towards the end of the project as well. Okay, next slide. And one other project is called Culturally Relevant Accessible Documents. And this is a project with Nunavumi Disabilities Makina Society. And they had a request to, wanted the creation of a document accessibility guide that's a lot simpler than what's generally out there and what's available, and also is culturally relevant for them. So this was really building this accessible and culturally relevant guide on how to create accessible content that includes Word, PowerPoint, and PDF documents. And it's a series of short videos in both English and Inuktitut that we're creating. And in the image here, you can see a video still with the title. Actually, my screen is too small to read the title. 1 second. Using the word accessibility assistant, and then it's also there in Inuktitut. And in behind there, you also see a video still showing the accessibility features of MS Word. Okay. Pass it back to Michelle.
So one of the areas that we focus our work on is growing strong teams. Right now, given AI and the way technology is changing, there's a lot of upheaval, and we're interested in how teams can stay effective. So we've worked with software development teams at a large media organization to identify, plan, and address process issues, particularly focusing on how people can collaborate more effectively in this environment. We took that opportunity to run a workshop with their team where we were able to modify and fine-tune their existing practices so they could improve the quality of their communication and products. And now I'll pass it to Colin for some more projects.
Thanks, Michelle. Another stream of Lichen's work relates to access to artistic performance and creative practice, both for audiences and for performers. Lichen is currently working in partnership with the Kinetic Light Dance Company. Kinetic Light is one of the foremost disability-led dance ensembles in New York City. And with them, Lichen is designing new software and hardware for disabled artists and performers. On the slide, there's an image of kinetic light in performance. There's three dancers on stage. Alice, who is suspended in the air doing their high flying work, Laurel below her, both in wheelchairs, and Geron on the left, dressed in black leather and tangled in barbed wire as they perform. So this stream of work is really about creating, taking what Michelle said about accessibility and inclusion being a driver for doing things differently, for finding new kinds of innovation that is more equitable and more sustainable, and really using the arts as a platform to develop new kinds of technology, put it into practice through the artistic performances of kinetic light, and then ultimately to create products that can be used by other arts organizations and by the general public. So an example of this is Automounts, which is an iOS application that provides personalized audio descriptions for live performances. This is specifically for blind and low vision audience members who may not be able to see the dance as it unfolds on stage. But Automounts gives them multiple channels of descriptive interpretation of that dance performance in multiple formats. So one description might be very direct, step by step, describing what the dancers are doing. Other descriptions are poetic interpretations by leading disability writers and poets, mixes in sound as well, the sound of the wheelchairs as they move on stage, and character narratives as well. So the image here is of a screenshot of the Automounts iOS app showing the different modes, different streams of audio description that are available in the application. Another project with kinetic light is building wireless and spatialized haptics. This is about exploring ways of feeling sound and music, particularly for deaf audience members, but also neurodivergent and other audiences find that vibration is another layer of being able to access on unfolding live performance. So if you can't hear the soundtrack to a dance, could you feel it in some way? Lichen has, with kinetic light, designed custom hardware for doing wireless haptics and software for composing vibration-based creative pieces that are used in dance performances and also now in installations. One of the images here is of the haptic installation at the Zollner Arts Center last October. And the image shows that there's a dedicated priority haptic and ASL, American Sign Language, priority seating for deaf audience members and those who want to try out the haptic experience. On the back of each seat is a haptic device that they can hold in their hands and experience the soundtrack of the dance through vibration. There's also an image of a brand new installation that we just premiered at the Duke Foundation on May Day last week. That is a kind of science fiction-like chair that has 8 spatialized haptic transducers, like little vibration speakers underneath the surface of the chair so that you can sit or lay on the chair and feel a custom composed vibration piece. And in the image, Alice, the artistic director of Kinetic Light, is sort of clinging to the top of this ramp-shaped chair that the piece is installed on. Last artistic project to highlight is work with a collective of dancers and engineers and creative technologists called the Choreodaemonics Collective that's really exploring accessible artificial intelligence, movement, robotics, and ways of recentering the human body within creative technology projects. And in March at Jacob's Pillow, a leading dance center and archive, we built an installation that combined movement recognition software that was specifically designed to be inclusive of diverse bodies, and that also blended archival dance footage from Jacob's Pillow's decades of American dance history with live video projections, robotics, and live performance. On the right, the image shows three dancers in the midst of performance, overlaid by really dense, noisy projections. And in the center right, there's drapes of fabric that actually that are a robot that are controlled in real time by software Lichen created to be responsive to bodies and to have a robot that dances and interacts in a kind of collaborative, conversational way with the artists. On the left is a image of the custom software developed by Lichen to enable this inclusive movement data tracking and data flows. And I will hand this off.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, one last project was just we wanted to mention was a platform cooperativism hub that we worked on with Trevor Schultz and a number of cooperatives worldwide. We designed and built an online hub for platform co-ops that included a resource library, directory, and a tool library. And you can see the landing page in the first image here. It says a hub that helps you start, grow, or convert to platform co-ops, with a picture of a big group of people sitting outside and posing. And then below that, you can see a screenshot of the platform co-op resource library as well. And all that can be found at platform.coop. And we also did some co-design at that time with Seva. Michelle had actually touched on that in the beginning. We co-designed a platform with a home beauty care co-op and also worked with a number of the co-ops in the Federation, including the Milk Co-op. Okay. I can pass it to Michelle.
So we love to collaborate, and I will just talk about a few of the things that we love to collaborate on. So designing and building web and mobile software, some of which you saw some examples of, supporting community-led research and design for complex projects, identifying and addressing accessibility barriers and meeting accessibility standards, supporting inclusive change, team growth, and process improvement in organizations, teaching and mentoring on community-led design and access technology, developing creative technologies for artists and cultural organizations, including accessible interactive installations and audience engagement, and exploring grants and other funding opportunities. So thank you so much for coming to our webinar, but I wonder if anyone has any questions for us.
We've stunned the room.
Okay, well, Andrew J both have questions. So we'll start with Andrew because you popped up first, and then we'll go to Drew J. Andrew, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
I'm wondering within larger cooperative organizations, I've always found that there's a challenge within technical groups, so developers, IT professionals, who work within a cooperative setting but may not be familiar with those cooperative values or be fully supportive of them. How do you overcome that when you want to encourage more either cooperative tools, cooperative platforms, in my case, cooperative hosting? I still find that a challenge in trying to explain why we might want to use this collective or this cooperative for service work or this type of hosting as opposed to ones that they're already familiar with, which is, big tech providers.
Jill or Dana, do you want to respond, or do you want me to?
And that was a question for any of the panelists today.
I mean, I think these things take time, and I think one of the things we were trying to get at is the importance of culture change. A lot of, for us, this community-led design approach is really about not necessarily being the expert as the designer, but really coming in and learning and giving tools, suggesting ways of working, and then recognizing that the culture change happens within existing structures and existing leadership. And I think there's a lot of work to teach engineers, technical people, software developers in particular, who often, are trained from, frankly, quite a young age that technology is all about solving problems and solutionism, and to kind of teach a shift in their role and ways of thinking away from solving problems and instead enabling others and sharing tools so they can solve their problems themselves is really key. But I don't think there's a secret. I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of conversation and teaching. It's one of the reasons why sharing resources in the Data Communities for Inclusion project was so important, is like, let's give examples of how other cooperatives have done this kind of work. Let's share practical guides and advice, and then some positions and some challenges and prompts to get people to start to think outside of the conventional framework.
Yeah, and I think, Andi, you touched on that too, building a movement and having, a collective of co-op or consortiums of co-ops or groupings that support that. Definitely takes time.
Okay, thanks so much for your question, Andrew. Drew J?
Hey, folks. Yeah, I really appreciate the presentation. Once again, really inspiring work, and really strikes me as like a cooperative sort of doing the sort of, I don't know, prefigurative work of like an actual future that you'd want to live in, or at least a piece of it. So really appreciated hearing about that. At the risk of being slightly boring, I'd like to sort of, I guess, ask the same question I asked the other folks, which is basically, how do you see like your work? I mean, I think you've touched on this a bit, but I'd love to hear you expand on how you see your work sort of fitting into expanding the cooperative tech sector, how you see the sort of future of the co-ops in tech, in terms of like, do you think that there are like, do you see next steps for federating or cooperating between tech cooperatives, I guess specifically in Canada? And then also, are there any sort of policies that you have your eye on shifting or influencing?
A great question. I mean, I think echoing Andi and Dante's response, that finding ways to collaborate, federate, mutual support is probably key. I wrote a paper with Ethan Wynn from the Obron Cooperative, formerly a member of the Collab Cooperative, back in 2023, I think it was, proposing a model of cooperativism called mesh cooperativism that's really sort of getting at the lessons learned from, for example, working with the Self-Employed Women's Association, where they put pretty strong, intentionally pretty strong limits on the scaling of individual cooperatives, because they found in practice that once a co-op got big in terms of the number of members, or maybe more importantly, the amount of revenue that was being generated, it became a real challenge to the grassroots governance. People started coming around thinking, hey, I want a piece of this. And so Seva's model was really about horizontal scaling. When you get to a certain size, make a new cooperative and then make sure that there's the federation and the union structure around those individual cooperatives to support the infrastructure that's needed in common. And so I think what that looks like in Canada, I'm probably still too new in the cooperative sector to say, but one would hope for both effort at the grassroots level to collaborate and to share resources, especially where access to infrastructure is very expensive. And I think, AI is one of the biggest challenges to the traditional platform cooperative model, where the technologies are so expensive and possibly so morally problematic that, like, getting your own AI system as a platform cooperative isn't going to work. It has to be some kind of much larger federated movement. I'll paste a link to that paper, but I don't know, Dana or Michelle, if you want to add to that, or Andi and Dante.
Yeah, I think we covered the answer from our end with respect to growth and coalition of co-ops.
I
Okay.
think the only other, oh, sorry, Michelle.
No,
I
go
was just
ahead,
gonna
Andi.
jump in.
Yeah,
I think maybe the only other thing that I would add in sort of thinking through Andrew's question as well about like culture is that I think like by and large most people are socialized to be like individuals and individual thinkers, and we're individual achievers, and like the cooperative mindset like makes room for that. Like we still want people to fill leadership roles, but it does require a mental shift to working with, right? And like there's no easy answer to be like, oh, you just do it this way. And culture can't be forced, but it can be taught, as Colin said, and it can be grown and cultivated. And I think one of those things is around thinking through what that mindset shift could look like, and then as an individual, and then sort of extrapolating out from there. So maybe that's sort of the last piece that I would add, as sort of like a response to both the last two questions.
Yeah, just very briefly, like what I see in the co-op sector is I think there's a lot of unlearning and then relearning what to do, because I feel like I talk to a lot of, especially, well, smaller and bigger, smaller co-ops often struggle with that idea that, they're trying to bring members in, but members just like people just don't know how to work collaboratively. Like they just don't understand that there's no boss. And then you inevitably get somebody who just ends up taking a lot of the work, and people are reluctant to kind of take ownership or step up, afraid of that responsibility or that risk, what that means. And that's like totally understandable, right? That's what we see everywhere, is this sort of, sort of capitalist model, right? Where it's not collaborative working. So I think certainly that's an issue, and again comes down to, I think, knowledge sharing and understanding, and having tools to support that collaborative and equitable decision making, and helping co-ops to make decisions together. I think is really important, and I think could help potentially a lot of cooperatives. We did have a couple comments and questions. So first we have Celie Quest, and Celie says, following Drew's first query, I think aiming ultimately beyond boosting a co-ops network in Canada is useful. And I indeed think organizing to foster more co-ops growth is needed. I worked near 10 years in a worker-owned co-op biz in the US. And I think the co-op sector can raise our profile more in coalition with labor unions and B Corp businesses. And different models, but aligning on prioritizing worker empowerment. Before tariffs became a clear threat, I've thought organizing a media campaign is needed to intro more average Canadian workers to benefits of co-op structures. I agree, Celie. and ultimately of moving towards non-extractive work management broadly. This media work could have an indie angle like postering, but messaging on digital channels matters too. Seeley's invite anyone to discuss with them. And then Suzette has a question. I suppose there's a question of how co-ops can be helped by technology, and also the question of how technology can be helped by co-ops. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I'm all for the media campaign to get more people aware of like how you can work differently. We have is it the U.S. Secretary of Commerce going on about how like the future of the U.S. work is you working in a factory where your kids and your grandkids are also going to work, and there's this just constant push from like that side of the aisle, but like it'll be. Where do I sign up for this media push to say like no, there's a better way to do things, right? Like I'm not saying the one co-op or the Hypha way is the way that it's going to work for everything or for the all sorts of employment, but yeah, there's a gap. I think there's a thirst to have some sort of push in the media, messaging and art that shows the alternative, positive futures that don't just end up in serfdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna commit to sending an email just to that to all participants today, and anyone who's interested in sort of exploring this, what this could look like. I'm let's do it. Any other thoughts on that? And again, how technology can help co-ops and how co-ops can help technology?
I guess maybe just a comment on that second question around the co-ops helping technology and vice versa. That there are some interesting examples in other parts of the world that have more robust cooperative ecosystems, like the Basque Country, where, as an example, a lot of the grocery stores are cooperatively run, and those grocery stores use point of sale software that's also developed by tech co-ops there. I'm using this as a specific example because I met with somebody that worked in one of those co-ops, so it's an example that I have like ready to hand. But I do think that there is some interesting, like the way you can sort of like slice and dice like what these relationships looks like. It doesn't necessarily need to be like the examples that we presented here. There are some interesting sort of like once you widen what you're looking at, I think there's some really interesting ways in which these two like tech and cooperatives can interplay. So hopefully that's just sort of helpful as an idea starter.
Thank you, Andi. Do we have any more comments on that, or do we have any more questions?
What country is that in, Andi? What did you say? That they do the grocery stores?
It's in Spain.
And Bharat, you have a question?
Just a comment, not really a question. I mean, the part two of it. I mean, how co-ops can help tech. Of course, big tech is generally very capitalistic, profit-driven. That's true. But then, I mean, there can be some pockets where one can find receptivity to cooperative ideas. I mean, it's something for example, I remember Google once invited a leading degrowth scholar. I mean, who has actually written a lot about cooperatives, because I attended that degrowth master's program, so I know. So they had invited him, and he gave a very good talk. It was a Google organized conference. So that is just one idea in terms of, I think, as Celia was mentioning about media campaign and those sorts of things. It perhaps could be an idea to go. I mean, like folks who are experienced, like say Andi, Dante, to go to these conferences and give a talk on how tech cooperatives work. I mean, because essentially the thing is, like, many people are just not aware of, or there's also an alternate way which works better, right? So that was my thought when about how co-ops can help tech, essentially big tech, transform to something better.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. If there is another opportunity to have this sort of outreach, if we feel like there's an appetite and we have the time to do some more share outs, I think that for sure we'll be there.
Okay, so I just want to thank everyone again today. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. It was such an inspiring and enlightening conversation. Huge thank you to our speakers, Andi Argast, Dante Sanchez from Hypha Worker Co-operative, and Dana Ayotte, Colin Clark, and Michelle D'Souza from Lichen Community Systems Co-operative. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you do. And for all the work you do in the cooperative sector, really transforming the focus of tech and really humanizing technology to make it so much more inclusive, accessible, and community driven.